Welcome to my podcast. I am Muhammad Bana. Today is the 24th of March, 2022, and we're on episode 2. Today's podcast is sponsored by Global Institute of Wealth, Preserving Wealth for Future Generations. I would like to introduce our guest today, Joshua Guest from KPMG based in Florida. Welcome, Joshua.
Thank you so much, Mohammed. It's great to be with you. I would just mention I am employed by KPMG, but my thoughts are my own. I'm not here as a representative of KPMG, just a representative of myself and my passion for Bitcoin and its blockchain.
That's great. That's great. Joshua, you know, Bitcoin spreading around the world like wildfire. It's great. We thousands of miles and kilometers away from each another, but we share the same passions. And it's an honor to have you on my podcast today. And go ahead and tell us your journey, how you discovered Bitcoin for a few minutes before we get into other topics.
Yeah, I'm happy to. And I really appreciate the opportunity to come and chat with you. I'm very passionate about Bitcoin. I've been in this space for a few years, but my journey into Bitcoin actually, I suppose, started even before that. I first heard of Bitcoin in 2016 because I was looking into a few business ideas and I'd heard about this new technology that was supposedly great for payments, which was Bitcoin. And unfortunately, I didn't decide to move forward with that business idea and completely forgot about Bitcoin for a couple more years. I rediscovered Bitcoin in 2019. Of course, that was during the middle of a bear market. So I suppose great time to discover Bitcoin and get to know more about it. But I became very passionate as I fell down the rabbit hole and started studying Bitcoin. At first, as many people can probably relate to, I was brought in by just the massive price increases. I'm not ashamed to say that originally I got into Bitcoin because of the price. It's as simple as that. When I dove a little bit deeper, I realized that Bitcoin is infinitely more than just its dollar exchange rate over the last 13 years. I realized that it has a lot of capabilities to level the playing field financially, as well as give a lot of power back to society. Unfortunately, the way the world has been going for the past, really a couple hundred years, but certainly the last several decades, more and more of our financial sovereignty is being taken by primarily governments, but of course with governments' blessings, a lot of financial infrastructure, financial companies. And while those companies may provide some level of service, I do think that Bitcoin's ability to give power over finances back to people is one of the most interesting aspects for me, and really why I've stayed for Bitcoin, even with everything else going on from a world perspective.
Yeah. So I think it's all about going down this rabbit hole, right? To sum it up. And it's a never ending, it's a deep hole, okay? And when you say you discovered it on the price point, I think a lot of us did discover it that way. What time was that? Like, was it 2019, you say? About what month?
It was in the fall of 2019. At the time, the price was, I believe, just under 10,000. So okay. Pretty far off of its all-time high at that time.
Was the effect of COVID there yet, or that price started moving? Because my journey into Bitcoin, I knew it in 2016 and 2017. You hear about it. I bought it like a stock. It went up. I made 50% gains. I sold it like a stock, like a share. And I forgot about it, and I missed that crash, or what you call the dip, right? And I actually went searching for alternate investment for my family office. Okay, so I have a family office, Muhammad Bana family office, and I was, tired of traditional investment models, and I went to the market looking for other investments. I did diversify into commodities like gold. And that's when I came across Bitcoin, and it's like, oh, I knew this. Let me put some investment into it, and you start monitoring it. Okay, but the effects of COVID and the lockdown came, and we started this. I would call it a bull run at that time.
Yeah, so I think you'd asked if I came into Bitcoin around the same time that COVID started. It was close. We here in the States, I mean, really started to notice it, or at least I did, around March. That's where everything financially kind of crashed, and that's where people kind of realized COVID was bigger than just the
Yes.
rumors of some disease coming, out of other parts of the world. Now,
Mm.
for me, I actually discovered Bitcoin around the middle, but a little bit past, middle of 2019. So I had been in the space,
That's great.
kind of trying to understand what it was for several months. Now, obviously, when the pandemic hit and a lot of the government responses, government fiscal responses started happening, I
Mm.
really came to understand the value of Bitcoin, a money that doesn't change based on the circumstances, doesn't change based on, who's at the wheel, because no one's at the wheel with Bitcoin. It's
Yeah.
open, controlled by no one, but at the same time, used and understood by its users.
Yeah. The beauty of it is there's no CEO, there's no head office, there's no switch off button. And I think that's what the commonality of what we both see in it. And what's happening in Ukraine, let's fast forward to modern day, okay? The more there's turmoil in the world, which is unfortunate, what's happening in Russia and Ukraine, and oligarchs, yachts are getting confiscated, money in Swiss accounts is being confiscated and frozen. People's Russian bank accounts in USA have been frozen. Then you realize the power of Bitcoin as alternate, unconfiscatable money. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, I spend a fair amount of time on social media, in the news. That's just, of course, the way of the world these days. And so I've heard quite a bit, obviously, about what's going on over in Russia and Ukraine. Now, what doesn't get focused on quite as much is the impact to individual people, small businesses, I mean, even large businesses to some degree, who by and large, I think probably didn't have quite as much to do with the conflict as the people in charge, the governments, right? These are people who, unfortunately, just based on where they live and the actions of people in far off government capitals, are being punished extremely hard, right? I mean, we're able to, as outsiders at least, hear all of the horror stories of things on really both sides of the conflict financially that are happening to people. And finances, I mean, at this point, if you can't pay for the things you need, it's really hard to survive. I can't imagine what a lot of people are going through. So I'm certain from a lot of commentary that I've seen online, there are people who fully agree with all of the sanctions that are happening. I'm not at this point really having a full opinion on that part, but I do think that for those who are sanctioned but had absolutely nothing to do and no desire for what's going on, it just I suppose the result is rather dissatisfactory to me. I think that Bitcoin is an open system that is going to, again, allow anyone to use it, no matter who they are, no matter what their beliefs are, no matter which side of political correctness they may fall on in a particular day. Bitcoin just exists. It just is, right?
Yeah.
And that's really how money should be, right?
Mm.
If you have one belief or another belief, that shouldn't impact your ability to protect your wealth and use that to protect your family, protect yourself, and to protect your property. So again, I don't have too much of a political opinion on the sanctions, other than I do believe wholeheartedly that Bitcoin is uncensorable, unconfiscatable, and that's what we need in money, something that can't be used as a weapon, political or otherwise.
Right. So I agree with you totally. I see it. And don't mistaken me, when I bring up the topic of Ukraine and Russia, what actually interests me also behind the scenes is the stats. Like example, when Ukraine said they need help from other countries, a lot of the collection to buy stuff was done through crypto, okay, was done through Bitcoin. So people gave crypto wallet accounts, and the rest of the world sponsored money, as I saw. Did you see that also? Like a lot of money got sponsored or sent or donated is the right word to people in Ukraine through using e-wallets.
Yeah, I have heard a bit, primarily on Twitter, about donations. I think that's where the Ukrainian government had originally made the request. At last count that I saw, at least, I believe it was about 50 million, I want to say, that had been donated. I think most of it was Bitcoin. I know there was some Ethereum donated as well. Maybe there were other altcoins that were also given. But I think from, again, an outsider's perspective, I see that as kind of a tacit recognition by the Ukrainian government and also by people wanting to make donations that Bitcoin is this open system, right? Again, whether you
that's how I'm seeing it.
Donating, yeah, whether you believe in donating to a government or not, right? No matter what your opinion is of what Bitcoin is being used for, it's simply a proof that Bitcoin doesn't care what it's being used for, right? Bitcoin is just for transferring value from one spot to another spot, or from one person to one person, one entity to another entity. So, I mean, I guess what I'm getting at is politics don't really enter into Bitcoin because Bitcoin doesn't care about politics, right? So, and that's again, that's how money should be, right?
I agree.
Politics are a human invention. Money is a human invention, but that doesn't mean that they are inextricably, linked.
I think that's the point I was trying to point to, okay, that without realizing it, okay, the world just adopted crypto or Bitcoin to donate money to a situation that's happening in 2022. I'm not, put the political situation away and let's just look at it. No one donated gold. No one donated silver. Everyone donated the easiest, fastest, quickest form of money. And that to me was like, yes, adoption's taking place, Metcalfe's law is in effect, we're going to get more users onto the interface.
Yeah, no, I agree with you there. It was, I think, I suppose, a big step for visibility. Again, on the political side, I really don't have an opinion because Bitcoin is just meant to be used, and it's being used for what a lot of people think are good purposes and what a lot of other people think are bad purposes. But again, I mean, at any point, at any time, any of us could fall on the wrong side of popular opinion. Does that really mean that we should have all of our money, assets, wealth taken away? I don't believe so, which is why I believe in Bitcoin as freedom money. It's open to everyone.
Yes. Okay, let's move on to other forms of topics of Bitcoin. Tell me what's happening in America at the moment. What's the general opinion? Is it Bitcoin being adopted more by institutions? Can you comment on how institutions are going to keep custody? Because, I mean, an individual can buy a few Bitcoin, put it on a hard wallet, have some seed phrases. What happens in a situation with companies that have $500 million and they want to put Bitcoin on their balance sheets? How do they store it? How do they, I mean, they're not going to just put it on one hard wallet.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have much of an insider's opinion at all, just because I haven't talked with anyone at these companies that have taken hold of it directly, or had any really back and forth with them at all. But what I imagine a lot of these companies are doing, just based on what I understand of regulation and the need to use regulated custodians, and a lot of the companies that we're hearing about buying large amounts, right? Like think of, MicroStrategy or Fidelity, companies that own large amounts of Bitcoin. I find it hard to believe that they would use a hardware wallet, for the simple fact that I doubt US regulation currently has any direction on hardware wallets. And these companies, of course, being regulated, they are going to try, and even though the regulations don't exist, they're going to probably try to map their actions as much as possible to existing regulation. So where I think likely the majority of institutional Bitcoin holdings reside is probably with regulated custodians. Coinbase, Gemini, a lot of the other big ones who, of course, have their own organizations, their own agreements with less name brand crypto custodians. So, I mean, Fidelity, I know Fidelity has, I think, their own custodial branch. So perhaps Fidelity is custodying their own, but again, likely not on a hardware wallet stashed in the CEO's, behind the CEO's wall in a safe.
100%.
I'm sure they're, using probably multi-sig configurations,
yes,
probably using a few different wallets, just because someone who's holding on to, the average retail user probably doesn't have even a full Bitcoin, right? Probably much less. That person might be comfortable holding it on a hardware wallet, and I definitely approve of self-custody. I think that's a great way to custody it, but given regulation, given the size of US dollars and other fiat currencies that a lot of these big institutions are putting into Bitcoin, I would find it hard to believe that they're using just a hardware wallet and trying to imagine that.
So what's interesting is we have a company, Unchained Capital, that deals in multi-sig wallets. We've got them coming on a future podcast. So stay tuned to hear what they have to say, and we'll take it from there. So tell us now, amongst your friends and family, are you known as the guy who always orange pilling everyone?
I do try. I'm sure this is the experience with everyone, but when you talk with Bitcoin with your friends and family, there are some people who get it. There are others who just kind of listen because they want to be nice to you, and there are others who think you're the crazy uncle or the crazy sibling who just talks about Bitcoin over Thanksgiving, right? That's a meme in the space, but I'm sure it has some basis in fact. So I have shared quite a bit with my friends and family and network about Bitcoin. Some of them are receptive. Some of them want to learn more. A lot of them aren't, and I understand that. I mean, I said earlier that I got into Bitcoin in 2019, meaning it had already existed for 10 years before I really dove into it and understood it. I heard about it 3 years before, but again, paid no attention to it. And so I can't really fault someone for getting into it when they're ready for it, whether that's 2011, 2019, 2025. I do think that the trajectory of Bitcoin is going to be that most of the world will someday be using it in some form or fashion. Do I think that's going to happen in 2022? Do I think it's going to happen in 2023? Perhaps not. I think it's going to be a similar uptake process. Bitcoin gets compared to the internet a lot, which, even after 25 years is at about 60% saturation. I could see Bitcoin having similar growth, right? Where it's, tens more millions of people come into the Bitcoin ecosystem every year. But of course, there are 8 billion and counting, right? So it's going to take a few years before 60, 70% of the world is using Bitcoin.
Well, I hear you, but I have a different opinion, a bit more bullish opinion, okay? I feel that there are more mobile phone users today than there ever was in the history of humankind, okay? There's plus minus 8 billion people in the world. There's about, the recent study I looked at from Hootsuite did a research. It was like a 60-page document. There's about 5 billion user phones, mobile phones, okay? When the internet came out more than 20 years ago, everything was on desktops. And you were like in South Africa, things are different in America. South Africa, if you had a desktop, you had to be a bit of a wealthy person or a well-to-do person, someone with extra cash flow at the end of the month to buy a desktop. Okay, today it's not the case. It's the common man has a smartphone. Almost every person on the street has a smartphone today. Okay, and I feel that the growth rate, example, when Facebook first came out, or just say Microsoft. So Microsoft took 44 years plus minus, and Apple took 40 years plus minus to get to $1 trillion evaluation, whereas Bitcoin's taken 12 years to get to $1 trillion. So I see the rate, Raoul Pal calls it exponential growth.
Yeah, I certainly think that the adoption curve might not be the same as a technology like the internet or Facebook or Google, right? But why I think it might take a little bit longer is because yes, Bitcoin is a technology, but it's much more than that, right?
Hmm.
My value that I assign to Bitcoin is on the money side. So I agree with you. I do think that the world is much more ready to adopt a new technology. What I'm not quite sure the world is yet ready for is to adopt a brand new type of money, right? Most people on the planet probably have no concept of money that you can exchange at a store or that you can pay
Yes.
your mortgage in that isn't controlled by a government and printed with some sort of political leader's face on it, right?
Hmm.
And so I think from a technology standpoint, yes, people are much more prepared to adopt a digital currency than they may have been to adopt a digital network like the
Yeah.
internet, right? But I do think there are a lot of people who are stuck on gold, right?
Hmm.
Because they think that's the store value asset, and stuck on, the fiat currencies because currently you can go anywhere in the world practically and spend a US dollar, or you can take any currency in the world. And if you can't use it when you go to another country, you can at least exchange it for a currency that the country will accept. So yeah, I think the adoption curve isn't going to be so much technology related. It's just going to be getting people used to the idea that there doesn't have to be a government backing their money, right? That Bitcoin has intrinsic value because, in part, there's no one controlling it.
And do you see, uh, what's your opinion on El Salvador adopting Bitcoin as legal tender? And who do you see following pursuit after this?
Yeah, I think it was definitely a big moment for the space. Again, not because it was a government accepting Bitcoin per se, but rather because it was a government stepping back and allowing their citizens to make their own decision about
Mm.
Bitcoin. I don't keep up too much with the stats, but I think based on what I have heard, after I think it's been about 7 or 8 months since the Bitcoin law went into effect, two-thirds of the population is currently using Bitcoin, which means two-thirds of people have made their decision to use Bitcoin in some fashion, and a third have used their decision, their choice up to this point to not use Bitcoin, right? So the government didn't come in and mandate Bitcoin usage. I think that Bitcoin usage should be optional, right? Governments should just step back, step out of the way, and let their citizens make their own decisions because someone who, thinks rationally about Bitcoin versus fiat is going to understand that money shouldn't be, losing its purchasing power 2% a year, 10% a year, 50% a year because someone else is taking away your wealth for their own benefit, right? They're going to realize that money that can't be taken if you say something wrong on the internet or you say something wrong in your dealings, that's valuable money, right? I think that what I'm getting at is government should just step out of the way because people will make their own decisions about whether or not to use Bitcoin. And I'm confident, in a match of Bitcoin versus fiat, Bitcoin is going to come out the winner.
Mm. I think we share that sentiment. Um, what actually fascinates me, okay, is countries like Venezuela, the inflation rate is flipping crazy. I mean, I couldn't imagine living in a country like that where you wake up every day and you don't know what the value of your money is and what, like yesterday, you could buy a can of Coke with this much money, and tomorrow it's not possible. I don't know how I'd be able to handle that.
Yeah, I can't imagine either. I mean, I live in the United States. Our currency is, relatively stable from an inflation standpoint, and so I definitely can't even begin to comprehend someone who's living under 50% annual inflation or, higher than that. I think 50% is economists' general idea of what hyperinflation. That's what they've decided hyperinflation is. 50% or more
Yes, yes,
annually. I can't imagine what it's like living in that country. But really, around the world these days, I mean, even in the United States, year on year inflation numbers that just came out, and those are the government's approved numbers, meaning likely not the real numbers, but the government's approved inflation numbers here in the United States were, I believe, 7.9% from March 2022 back through March 2021. So in a year, your US dollar has lost, massive amounts of its value, in my opinion. Right? Any amount of lost values is unfortunate, in my opinion. Meanwhile, even though Bitcoin has fluctuated in value in exchange rate quite a bit over the last year, you don't have to worry about some government coming and printing lots of Bitcoin for themselves and then devaluing, right? I mean, really, what drives Bitcoin's exchange rate is simply supply and demand. And again, scarcity, or the number of people on a day-to-day basis coming into the environment, whether that's to store their wealth in Bitcoin or day trade, or because they heard about it from a friend and decided, hey, I'm gonna buy $10, and then they get scared out of the market, right? People could be coming into Bitcoin for any number of reasons, but that's really the only thing that's driving Bitcoin's US dollar fiat exchange rates, is just simply how many people on a day-to-day basis want to buy it, either to hold it for a long time or to hold it for a much shorter time. There's no governments coming in and manipulating things. There's no institutions coming in and printing more through giving out loans and stuff. It's just there are almost 19 million Bitcoin, and there are going to be 6.25 released about every 10 minutes. Simple as that.
I understand all the facts about Bitcoin. I've studied it more than 1,000 hours. I've done some courses on it, the Sailor course, the MIT course. And I'm not bragging here. It's just that where I'm getting is whatever you're saying about the block size, the halvings, the scarcity, I get it. But I read something nowadays on social media. When we're putting out content like this, we actually doing this content, this podcast, for the people back home that are listening, or the listeners that are actually less educated than us. We're not making this content for Michael Saylor or Rahul Paul or Max Kaiser, right? So for the person listening to this podcast, okay, that knows nothing about Bitcoin, and they're sitting in South Africa, Josh, give us 5, 10, 15 minutes. What's your advice to someone sitting here in South Africa, Southern Africa, Africa? What's your advice to them?
Yeah, I think for me, when I first came into the space and was a new entrant, right? Someone who knew really nothing. Like I said, initially it was a surprise, but what really stuck out to me was understanding how money had permeated throughout my life, right? I have to use money to pay for everything. I have to use money to transport the value of my time now into the future. There's really not too many aspects of life and family that aren't touched by money in some way.
Agreed.
So really what I would recommend people think about is, what do you want your money to do for you? And is the current money that you're being, for all intents and purposes, forced to use, right? Because most countries don't accept anything other than their fiat currency or a larger country's fiat currency. They don't accept it. What is that currency doing for you? Is it allowing you to store your value? Is it allowing you to keep a hold of it no matter what happens in economies, no matter what a government decides about what you're saying and doing, right? Whether or not it agrees. Is your money allowing you to have full, complete control over yourself and your finances? And if it's not, is that acceptable to you? For a lot of people, it is, right? A lot of people are at least somewhat aware of Bitcoin, somewhat aware of the fact that Bitcoin, can't be controlled by a government or institution. And at this point, they're still fine using their fiat currencies. Other people may come to that realization and realize that they're not okay with, the government swooping in and taking money from people who are trying to peacefully protest, or a government swooping in and blocking people because the leader of their country or their government is doing something that other countries don't like, right? A lot of people are going to realize, hey, I can only control myself, my finances. I don't want to be responsible for the actions of someone else that I have no control over and have my money, my safety, my ability to survive taken or otherwise impacted because of the decisions of others. So I think that's really just understanding that Bitcoin is so much more than just price. It's so much more than just one aspect of the technology. I believe that Bitcoin is really a revolution in self-sovereignty. And that's something that unfortunately, I don't believe the world has had again for at least the last several decades, but probably a lot longer.
I think, you know, the unfortunate part is for Bitcoin to click, okay, in your brain. And I like how when Michael Saylor said the once, when there's a moment where that, that click happens, and he says thereafter there's anxiety that kicks in, that shit, you need to switch your brain from fiat to hard money, okay? And I hope the listeners out there can understand what I'm saying. It's like the movie The Matrix. Have you watched The Matrix, right?
I have, yeah.
Okay. And
it's been a long time.
It's been a long time, but I recommend it to every listener out there that please go and rewatch The Matrix. And a lot of the youth that I speak to today, The Matrix was way before their time. Okay. Like if I meet a 16-year-old today and I'm telling them, The Matrix is not a movie. It's actually said The Matrix is a documentary, right? Choosing the pills and whatnot. And I went and I watched it again. And I tell you, watching it in the year 2021 or 2022, it's so different than watching it when it got launched, episode 1, okay, the first movie. And then there's these memes that come out, okay, and you see them on Twitter and social media where, Neo is asking, so what are you trying to tell me, that when one day Bitcoin will be worth $1 million and then I'll sell it? So he's like, no, when it's worth that much, you won't need to sell it. So I'm saying, unfortunately, coming back now, that people have to go and spend time to go and study what is the characteristics of money, like back to school. And school doesn't teach this. Our education system in school, you can go learn about maths, you learn about geography, you go learn about science. I believe in South Africa, the schooling system's so outdated, okay, that they don't even teach you for 1 hour in your entire 10 years there what makes money. What's the characteristics? It needs to be scarce, it needs to be divisible, it needs to be fungible, transferable, the characteristics, right? And the beauty of this is that when you start going down the rabbit hole, you learn economics, you learn history of money, you learn about those rye coins, like the bullish case of Bitcoin. I recommend it to every listener out there. VJ Boyapati's got the small write-up called The Bullish Case of Bitcoin. It's a quick, simple read. Then there's books like from Seyfuddin Amos, The Bitcoin Standard. There's another book called 21 Lessons, that whoever's out there listening, that all you have to do is just take that first step and spend some time educating yourself instead of sitting for hours on YouTube or hours on Netflix, hours on TikTok. Do you know what? If you go and research or just start going down this rabbit hole, I promise you, it's like you feel like you're zooming out, you become awake. They say woke, okay? And then you realize the rest of the world doesn't see what you see, or the common person so busy waking up, going to work, coming home, that they don't even know there's inflation of 7% in America. A lot of people are oblivious to the inflation rate.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. There are so many good resources, and I believe more and more coming out. So obviously, you and I are both passionate about Bitcoin, passionate about producing educational content. So definitely a plug for both of us. But you've touched on already in the last 30 minutes, a lot of other people who, at least by outward appearances, care quite deeply about Bitcoin, care quite deeply about people understanding why it has value. I definitely find myself in that camp. And so, sure, the majority of the world at this point is coming from square one. They know really nothing about Bitcoin, period, or they've heard about it by name or its price and nothing else. But anyone who wants to understand more about Bitcoin can find a lot of content, and a lot of that content is good, that will help them understand the basics and take it so much deeper.
Take the opportunity, drop your website. Tell the listeners, tell us about your website. Tell us why you make so much effort to make content, and how do people find your website? Where do they go to?
Yeah, I'd love to take the opportunity. So as everyone can probably tell, I am very passionate about Bitcoin, and I do try and help new entrants understand how it works and why it matters. Because when I came into the space, there was good content out there, but it was a bit hard for me to find, right? I've spent now 3 years trying to find content, and I found a lot of it. But when I first started, it was, where do I look? Who do I trust? How do I know that someone's, trying to help me understand how I can change my life versus just trying to, eventually do a rug pull on me, right? And so after I'd been in the space for about a year and a half, I felt like there was more that I could be doing to raise awareness. And so that's why I started my Bitcoin newsletter. It's called the HiFi Crypto Letters. It is mostly focused on Bitcoin and the technology. I do just because my newsletter tries to take current events in the space and in the world and relate them to Bitcoin, and again, why Bitcoin matters. I do, of course, talk about other areas of the crypto space, right? DeFi, NFTs, all of that stuff. Again, from the perspective of why does Bitcoin matter? What is the context of Bitcoin in this current event? How is Bitcoin different? How does it provide value? So I have been doing that now for a year and a half or so. And I have found quite a bit of engagement, which has been wonderful. I do get comments quite frequently from people who understand the content. Some of them are veterans in the space. Some of them are new entrants. But so far, it's helped me to better understand what the community wants and better understand what people who are trying to receive knowledge about Bitcoin want. And so, like I mentioned, it's called the HiFi Crypto Letters. You can find it at the HiFiCrypto.substack.com. It is a Substack newsletter.
Okay, what we're going to do for you is when we publish this on YouTube, even on Spotify, even on Apple Play, we're going to put the link so the listeners can come to and find your website. Okay, I must, congratulate you on the effort. And the thing is, it takes a lot of time to make this content. I know, doing this podcast myself, and doing it out of a passion is the only way. Okay, because you're not getting, when you start, you don't get paid. You're going against the grain of community or society. You could have been doing anything else, let's say for yourself, but you're doing this for a bigger purpose. Okay, so someone the other day just mentioned to me, why was Sony Walkman so great? Because when the guy who started Sony, he had a bigger purpose. He wanted Japan to be known as a country for good quality, even though he was starting Sony, So he built the Sony Walkman, but with a bigger vision that this company mustn't just promote his company and sales. He wants his country to be known. And I can see it in you and other Bitcoin people where it's not just about the content. It's not about the followers. It's not about the likes. Okay. And how often do you make content on your...
Yeah, so I've got a few different social media channels along with my newsletter. But for the newsletter itself, it's all free content. And I produce an issue twice a week, Tuesday mornings here in the States and Friday mornings again. So I'm on Eastern time in the United States. So my issues go out at 10 a.m. Eastern, Tuesdays and Fridays. And like I said, I've been doing it for about a year and a half. Very passionate about Bitcoin.
That's hardcore.
Yeah, I don't get paid, right? You hit on it on the head. Maybe someday, someone will decide to pay to hear my opinions, but right now I'm sharing those opinions because I want people to not just understand that I'm passionate about Bitcoin, but hopefully gain something from the knowledge I've gathered from others, that I've gathered from my research about Bitcoin, because I do truly believe that what we're starting here in our Bitcoin economy is something that is going to revolutionize finance. for people forever, right? I can't see the future, but I do believe that the future is going to be brighter financially, if nothing else, thanks to Bitcoin and the amount of freedom that Bitcoin is allowing. So I do this, yeah, because I'm passionate, just like you are.
Yeah, it's like hitting me right now that this is actually flippin' amazing, okay? Because you have a passion, I have the same passion, and we in total opposite ends of the world, right? And this podcast, or let's say Zoom and technology that has evolved in the last few years makes this possible. 20 years ago, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Did you ever think 6 months ago you'd be having a conversation with a guy in South Africa about your passions? No. Right. And
it's amazing.
It is. And I hope this is the first of many conversations and build our relationship and, network. And that's why I also started this podcast, because I want to connect with someone in Venezuela and know what they're going through and share that journey with us, and with our listeners. I want to speak to someone in another part of the world. And Zoom makes that possible. The podcast makes us possible. And we all out there to learn. And, look, my religion is Islam. And we have a saying in Islam that seek knowledge from the cradle to the grave. And, finding Bitcoin makes you search. I mean, at 40, I went back to studying. And I never thought I'd go back and do courses online. But it was different to studying in your 20s. It's like you study in your 20s because you have to go to university and you come out of school and, your parents tell you go study, get a college degree or something like that. But studying something that you're passionate about, and I admire you put out 2 newsletters a week. That is dedication.
Thank you. Yeah, I love what you touched on about just Bitcoin and technology connecting people from all around the world, right? Because we all have differences, but we all have a lot of passions that intertwine, desires that intertwine. We have differences, but there are also a lot of things that connect us. And I believe that Bitcoin is and certainly can be one of those things because, again, no matter who we are, where we live, we want the ability to protect our money, protect our families by using the money that we've sacrificed our time for.
It's the family you're touching on.
Yeah, no. Unfortunately, no matter where we live right now, most of that is withheld from us through fiat currencies. And so for those people who are discovering Bitcoin and deciding whether that's, putting all of their wealth or part of the wealth or just a tiny little bit of their wealth, they're finally, for at least that piece that they put in, having complete control over it. No government, no node, no miner, no company can take that away from them, right? Because of the decentralized blockchain that protects everyone's wealth equally, no matter who they are or what they believe. So that idea, I believe, will unite us. And that's why I don't see Bitcoin as some revolution that's going to be contained to South Africa or the United States or El Salvador. It's something that people all around the world are going to find a lot of value in.
Look, on another episode, we could touch on remittance, payments, because that's a big thing in Africa and a big thing in South America, where a lot of people working in other countries send money back home to support their families. But we don't have enough time today. So just on a quick wrap up for this episode, what would you tell someone that tells you, oh, but the Bitcoin's kind of, I'm going to say kind of crash. People that don't know about Bitcoin or don't zoom out, they say, oh, it was $62,000. It's down to 35. It's so risky. It's so volatile. On your parting note, what do you tell people that you meet?
Yeah, it kind of goes back to what I was saying before about supply and demand of people who want to buy Bitcoin and people who want to sell Bitcoin, right? Because Bitcoin hasn't yet reached that status where billions of people around the world are using it not just to save their money, but also to pay for things, right? At this point, there are lots of buyers and lots of sellers on a daily basis, and some days there are more, some days there are less. So for someone who is, trying to understand the level of exchange rate volatility for Bitcoin, I say, definitely zoom out, right? But understand that that's part of the, I suppose, growing pains, to use that term, of Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin is not going to conquer finance in a day, right? It's going to have some growing pains. The exchange rate with whatever the local currency is going to go up. It's going to go down. We already know that the value of fiat currencies are going down over time. So yes, if you send Bitcoin, it might be worth a lot less or a lot more the next day,
Yes.
right? But I think looking at the long-term trajectory, you can start to understand that there is a lot of value that Bitcoin is creating, and I believe has a pretty solid chance to still create. So yeah, zoom out is the cliche, but it certainly helps to understand that Bitcoin is only 13 years old. And really for most of that, there were only a few hundred, then a few thousand, then a few tens of thousands of users. It's really only in the last few years that usage is exploding to where we now have millions, tens of millions of people. Where is it going to be in 5 years? Who knows? But I believe that a lot more people are going to use it. And as more people use it, as the network grows, its growing pains are going to slow down.
Joshua, fantastic. It's been such an honor to talk to you. I really enjoyed the conversation. I wish you all the best on your endeavors and your Bitcoin journey. And I hope to speak to you soon and bring you back on as a guest. Thank you so much.
Thank you as well. It's been a pleasure. And yeah, I'd be happy to be back sometime. So looking forward to our next conversation.
Keep well.
Thank you. Bye-bye.